Welcome to the Gridiron Expert. I'm Connor Hibbett. Next up on our team previews, we're going to be looking at the Kansas State Wildcats. And joining us on the channel today to talk a little bit more about the Wildcats for this upcoming fall is Mason Voth. Mason, welcome to the channel.
Thanks for having me. Ready to talk about the Cats. June, we're close to a month out from Big 12 Media Day, so as we get closer to it, I'm starting to get more and more thoughts in my head. What I want to ask Chris Kleiman about, who are going to be the representatives there for K-State that we get to talk to. So, getting very close to being actual football season.
Yeah, and definitely this is one of my more favorite times of the year when we start building up for college football. And of course, college football is my favorite sport. Great time of the year to look over some college football squads this coming fall. And of course, we're looking at the Wildcats today. So when you look at Kansas State for this coming season, we'll get into the position groups here momentarily. What is the overall thought and the expectation, and do you think that Kansas State is primed for a potential Big 12 championship appearance?
They should be, and that's kind of the consensus feeling throughout the fan base is that if they're not playing in Arlington, then there's going to have to be some more serious conversations. Last year was going along pretty smoothly until November, and they suffered three of their four losses in November. Two of them you can make sense of. It was to the team that won the Big 12 and almost beat Texas in the playoff. The other was a road game at your rival, their first chance to ever win double-digit games in a season. The one that really sticks and made things worse, though, was the Houston game. And then from there, it's the way things looked. I think they were playing better by the time that they lost to Iowa State, but it was clear that they had issues in the games against Houston and Arizona State. And that's one of the big things that they've addressed this offseason. They had a pretty good stable of offensive linemen, but for some reason, K-State kept adding more and more in the transfer portal. And we are kind of going, why is this happening? Well, during the spring, Chris Kleiman said that he thought that one of the areas that really hurt them last year was they got worn down with blocking and that too many guys were having to spend a majority of the reps on the field and they couldn't alternate linemen as much as they wanted to. So they thought that hurt the run game, which is significant. You had DJ Giddens, who was an NFL running back drafted by the Colts, and he couldn't really run the ball the last month of the season, except for when they played Cincinnati. So that seems to be something they've addressed. Avery Johnson now has a full year as a starting quarterback under his belt, so you think that would take a jump. And once again, they're trying to kind of retool the wide receiver room outside of Jace Brown to see if you can get any actual production from there. So they are one of the top to bottom best teams in the Big 12 right now. It's just their flaws last year were so significant that it led to them falling short of where I thought they probably should have been last season. They should have probably been in Arlington last year. You look back the year before that, it's a little bit easier to explain what happened. They end up having a four-loss season the year prior when Will Howard had his final year at K-State, but all four of those losses were by one score. It was at Missouri, who won the Cotton Bowl. It was at Texas, who was in the playoff. The Iowa State game in the snow was really the only one that didn't make much sense because Oklahoma State, they had played in the Big 12 title that year as well. So that's kind of the thing where last year I think it hurt a little bit more the way it happened. All the losses were together. You lost a lot of momentum. Now this team kind of has to prove that that's not who they're going to be. And a lot of that'll fall to Avery Johnson kind of pulling them out of the mud.
And talking about those one score games, welcome to the Big 12.
Yeah.
Big 12. You gotta love the chaos of that conference. So you were discussing some of those flaws, and one of those flaws you mentioned was the depth along the offensive line. So we'll start up front here. They bring in a few transfers, including George Fitzpatrick from the defending national champion Buckeyes. So give me the overview of this offensive line. A lot of new faces here. What's the expectation for this group?
So there's going to be, it's going to be a weird blend, really. That now you look at it, the guys that are going to play, you're probably touching close to nine offensive linemen that will be in a pretty steady rotation out there. And a good mix will be guys that have been in the program for a while or guys that have been brought in pretty fresh. So George Fitzpatrick was probably one of the most notable offseason ads for K-State on the offensive line. They also added another Ohio State transfer, Gabe Powers at linebacker, who we can talk about in a little bit. Will Howard instrumental in both of those guys kind of being funneled to K-State. Will still has a brother who's an offensive lineman at K-State, so the connection there kind of helped out for him. But they are going to have Taylor Poitier back, who I think this is like his sixth or seventh season. He's had a weird turn where he was here. So he got the COVID season. He got his natural red shirt. He's had a couple of medical red shirts because he's been injured in like the first game of the season and been knocked out. So they're going to have experience with him available. Fitzpatrick will be in the mix, and then they keep adding a bunch of guys through the portal. Offensive line being the important one. Nelson from Penn State, I think, is probably going to be one that seems in line to maybe be a starter if you're looking at a rotation. So I don't know if you're going to actually be able to classify all of these guys as true starters or what their role is, but I think that that's probably one where you look at, okay, he's probably going to come in and be on there. So JB Nelson and George Fitzpatrick, I think they get a good reps there. And then from that point, Poitier probably fits in. They bring back Sam Hecht, who was a pretty solid revelation at center last year. So they'll have that available to them. And then the rest is just going to come down to a bunch of young guys. They're not really all that young anymore, but we've heard about them a lot for the last couple of years in Manhattan. Like Andrew Leingang, he's kind of got to, stay healthy. That's been a thing with him. Some of it's not even been football health in the past. He's had other things that have held him out of action. John Pastore is another guy that he's got the size they really like. And like, you can just go down the list. There's going to be a lot of guys at that spot. And at the very least, if it doesn't work out to the exact way that Chris Kleiman wants it, where it's, hey, we're rotating guys in and out, we're staying fresh that way, when it's the first week of November in a downpour in Houston and we shouldn't throw the ball 40 times, we can survive that game as opposed to what they did last year where they did throw the ball 40 times in the pouring rain and lost to a team they shouldn't have lost to. So even if that doesn't happen, though, you're looking at, okay, if some guys fail, we have enough serviceable replacements. So offensive line, while it's going to be maybe a work in progress, kind of plug and play, finding the right path, especially since you've got a new offensive line coach this year. Connor Riley left for the Cowboys. I still think that they're going to be set there, and that shouldn't be a weakness for this team as they get into the middle part of the season. It may take some time early on to figure out, which makes it a little concerning that you start week 0 with Iowa State, a conference game. It's going to be important, and Iowa State, they have a pretty salty defensive line, so that's going to be interesting to watch. But as the season wears on, I think there's enough depth here that you're going to have the opportunity to be in a solid place with this group.
And another position group that has a lot of new faces is the receiver room. You mentioned Jace Brown a few minutes ago. He's probably going to be the top guy here, I assume. But who are some of these other transfers that have stepped up, or do you expect some of the youngsters, maybe like a Larry Porter or Andre Davis, to step up?
So we'll see. Larry Porter at some point is going to be, I think, a pretty good player for K-State. It's going to be interesting to see just how fast that happens. I think, at first I thought behind Jace Brown, because he'll be the number one, and he is going to be in a position where he might be able to touch 1,000 yards for the first time since that'd be the first since 2014 that happened at K-State. They had 2 that did it that year, Tyler Lockett and Curry Sexton. But he should be at least an 800-yard receiver, probably closer to 9 in that category. And then behind him, they brought in a handful of guys. Jaron Bradley is one from Boston College that he's 6'5", 200. So he is a far bigger receiver than anything K-State has had in recent memory that might actually see significant playing time on the field. He didn't do a whole lot at Boston College. I think there were some injury things that happened. But the reason he ends up in Manhattan is because his former head coach at Texas Tech, Matt Wells, is the offensive coordinator at K-State now. And I was a little skeptical when they brought him in. I thought it would be a dude that maybe had like 15 catches all season, and you saw a majority of them just being, all right, we're going to chuck it down the field and hope he can go up and get it, or, the goal line fades and all that. The buzz out of spring seems to be that he's going to be a more pure receiver than that. So that is significant and something that people have kind of held on to. I think another guy that they are expecting to be one of the top 3 receivers on this team and maybe the number 2 is Jerron Tibbs. He was a sophomore at Purdue last year, put up pretty decent numbers for a young guy in the Big Ten on a horrible football team. So those three guys seem to be in a decent spot. And then they've got a couple of others out there where they brought in kind of a burner, Caleb Medford. He's not going to have a ton of catches, but I think their hope is that he provides a little bit more big play potential because that was a thing last year. Outside of Jace Brown, and really the last 2 years, if it's not Jace Brown, this team isn't ripping off massive plays through the air. It was, Keegan Johnson doing a lot in the middle of the field. And then you really were short on options after that. So they were definitely looking to get a little bit more explosive, and they do that because I think they believe in Avery Johnson, the passer, so much.
And speaking of Avery Johnson and the passing department, what kind of room for growth are you expecting from Johnson this fall?
He's got to get more consistent. And that's where the last month of the season was a little disheartening because you would have liked to have seen his performance in Boulder kind of be the jumping off point for a little bit more consistency. And he did it the week after that. He threw the ball quite a bit at West Virginia. West Virginia was not good, but they carved him up on the road in Morgantown, and he looked good throwing the ball. But from that point forward, it seemed like things kind of got a little shaky. Now, some of that could be the fact that they had to rely a little bit more on throwing the ball when they should have been a run-based team, but they couldn't just due to the offensive line situation. But he's got the completion percentage has to go up. His decision making is probably the biggest issue. The interceptions last year, a good number of them, you just kind of shake your head and go, that wasn't a great move. He had a bad one against Arizona State. He had a couple of mistakes against Houston. Iowa State, he had some bad decisions where he took a bad safety late in the game because he tried keeping a play alive instead of throwing it away, which is so bizarre because the first game we saw him start at K-State, he was fantastic about that stuff. Where when he played against NC State in the Pop-Tarts Bowl his freshman year, it was, okay, if it's not there, I know to throw it away. Let's live to see another down. And that kind of changed a little bit last year, and I don't know what the reasoning behind that might be, but I think he's just got to get a little crisper with his decision making. And then throwing the ball, he's been better as a thrower on the run or off balance than he has been when he's able to actually get his feet set and everything. He's just got to become a little bit more accurate when those shots 20 yards plus down the field are available to him. Because Jace Brown made up for a lot of it last year. If you go look at some of the bigger connections that those two had, early in the year, there was one against Oklahoma State where Jace Brown broke free and Avery kind of underthrew him, or he had to kind of readjust. Even the touchdown pass in Boulder to basically end the game 50 yards. It was a good throw, but Jace Brown had to kind of hold up and stutter, and that drew pass interference, and then he still caught it and scored the touchdown. So that's where he's got to be better. I think he will be, though. Most of these quarterbacks do make adjustments from their first full year as a starter to the next. He's totally aware of where his shortcomings were last year. Everybody in his camp. Like, I think some people just assume, star quarterback goes to a place like K-State, like everything's on his terms. He might be fat and happy, not worry about this stuff. That's not the case. Like him, his dad, everybody, they are well aware of what's going on. Avery Johnson very much committed to Chris Kleiman and Matt Wells. I think that he's worked a lot this offseason to get better in that area. And like I said, with the receivers, he hopes to have a few more options there because last year it really was just if Jace isn't open, we're not going to have much in the passing game.
And speaking of that room for growth for Avery Johnson, he's so athletic where it's kind of a rarity to see guys with that ceiling not have that first to second year leap. So yeah, I would not be surprised to see Johnson break through the season and really improve as a passer. I do want to mention though, like the backup quarterback situation for
Mm-hmm.
Kansas State. So their previous backup, I believe, is now going to be the projected starter at Buffalo. So take me through the quarterback room here.
So yeah, Taquan Roberson, speaking of that Colorado game, he was really only needed for that one game last year. There was half a drive where Avery had to go out, go to the locker room. He ended up finishing the drive when they were at like the 2 yard line and they scored a touchdown, but Roberson made some throws. And I think he did exactly what K-State wanted out of it, where it was we need a guy with experience that if something happens can come in, hold down the fort for a bit. He did it well, and he was able to parlay that into hey, I had a good moment at K State. Now I can go be a starter again for my final year of college football. So that left behind him then kind of some holes for K-State. The reason they added him, I don't think they see Jacob Knuth as the guy that they would want backing them up long term at any point. He's been in the program a couple years now. He had transferred from Minnesota, so K-State Minnesota recruited him out of high school. He commits to Minnesota. He then transfers as a walk-on to K-State at first. He's on scholarship now. But I think that the likely second string quarterback, maybe not at the start of the season, but certainly if it got down to, well, Avery's out, we got to go to somebody, I think it would be Blake Barnett, who's going to be a redshirt freshman this coming year. Another really good athlete out of Colorado. He had good track times for his size when he came out of high school, and so he's got some speed to him as well. There's some arm strength that he also possesses, and nobody obviously is shooing Avery Johnson out of the door, but I do think people are starting to think, after this year or next year, whatever Avery's done at K-State, it's going to be fascinating to see what Blake Barnett looks like. So I think that is probably the way that the quarterback room is going to ultimately settle. And K-State, I think, feels good about it because they haven't added a transfer quarterback this year. So they must seem willing to ride with what they have. Now, part of that is also they thought that they were probably going to be restricted to only 105 players on their rosters. So you already have enough quarterbacks or whatever. But I think they trust in Blake Barnett. If they need to, they'll be good enough to use him.
And before we get to the rushing attack with the running backs, I do want to quickly highlight the tight ends. I believe the top three return. Is that correct?
Yeah, they are bringing all of these tight ends back from last year that just got target after target in the red zone. I think if you said the top three, those guys hauled in
12 of the 25 touchdown
yeah,
passes, right?
almost all of the touchdowns it felt like last year. And that was the one area where Connor Riley is an offensive coordinator last year. You look at and say, man, he seemed to have those guys open constantly. But yeah, they're going to bring back. Actually, I think if you go and look at it, it's really going to be all four of the tight ends from last year are back. Then you add into the fact that you're bringing in Lincoln Cure, who's this 4-star, whatever he may be, but he's a top 40 recruit in the country. You battled to the very end with Oregon to get him. He's going to come in, and I think he's going to be too athletic and too good to not be on the field at various points, whether that's using him some at tight end, which is his natural position, or if they're going to say, we're just going to find ways to line him up wide and see what he can kind of do with his athleticism. This is going to be a solid room. The area where they struggled a little last year was their blocking, which is still an important part of being a tight end, especially in K-State's offense at times. And they were one of the ones where you could kind of point to and say the blocking failures in the passing game or some of their runs fell on the tight ends. There were some receivers last year that you only need to pick up half a block, and they could not do that. So that's one area where they'll have to improve, but they all showed a very reliable spot as pass catchers last year. And Avery Johnson seems to connect well with a lot of them. And Lincoln Cure being an addition there is going to be an exciting thing, even if it's only a handful of games or moments that he gets this coming year.
And then looking at the running backs, is Dylan Edwards like a true RB1 here, or do you think that we're going to see 3 to 4 running backs have a lot of carries?
I think he's probably a guy that you're looking at. He's going to get probably 55%, 60% of the carries this season. They like Joe Jackson a lot. Joe Jackson showed a lot last year in the moments he got. That those guys they're going to be good enough to coexist with each other, and we kind of saw that in the bowl game against Rutgers for K-State, where Dylan Edwards was obviously the star because he had almost 200 yards on the ground. He had some catches as well, but Joe Jackson also had a solid day in the game against Rutgers. So I'm anticipating those guys to split it up. And then there's still a room where there's probably going to be one other running back that can get a decent amount of touches, not anything insane, but probably where it's natural to see three guys in a rotation, where that really hasn't been the case at K-State in a while, which is odd just because that was how Chris Klieman did things at North Dakota State, and that's how his first season went at K-State. He had three running backs that saw the field a majority of the time: James Gilbert, Jordan Brown, and Harry Trotter. And then a guy named Deuce Vaughn joined the team, and it's like, oh, we don't really need to have all these guys. We'll give them the deuce. But then DJ Giddens was good enough in 2022 that they trusted another running back to, I don't know what the exact split ended up being, but I bet DJ cracked 30% of the carries between him and Deuce. And then obviously last year, the last 2 years, it was DJ, then Trayshawn Ward, and then Dylan Edwards last year. Dylan Edwards is talented enough that he's going to be able to be just fine here. They like his running ability. They think that he can be an every down type of guy. But Joe Jackson also just too good. You can get some blows for Dylan Edwards, which became important last year in their running back situation. And then we'll just kind of see. There's probably two or three running backs that'll fight for that third spot to see just who gets the occasional carry here and there when both running backs need a break.
Do you think Edwards could be like a 900 yard rusher this year, maybe even 1,000 if things go right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you look at what he was able to do last year on 74 touches. Ended up racking up close to 550. So I think he's probably in a position where he will at least get close to that number. And really, in K State's offense, he probably should. It's just going to be fascinating now with Matt Wells calling the plays. Is that going to be something where this K State's more pass happy than they've been in past years? It doesn't mean that they're going to go, you know, rewind 12 years in the Big 12 and be like Oklahoma State or Baylor was back then. But I think K State knows that you have to throw the ball a little bit more. I think they believe in the quarterback that they have and they want the receivers to be a bit better. But I think Dylan Edwards probably gets close. I think 900 should probably be the target number for him. And then if he doesn't get to 1,000, I think the expectation would be that's because Joe Jackson also had a pretty high number of rushing yards, not because Dylan Edwards wasn't capable of doing it himself.
So moving over to the Kansas State defense, up front, there are a lot of guys that return, but they will be having to replace their top pass rusher. So is there anybody that you are expecting to have a huge breakthrough season, or do you think this will just be a pretty deep room there? It's like a by committee approach, and you can trust, say, like seven, eight, nine guys.
So I think you're going to be able to trust a lot of guys in this room. There are a lot of names out there that are going to be capable of helping you out. Toby Sonmi is going to be in there. He might be the one that fans are the most interested in. Cody Stufflebean, Travis Bates, Chidi Obiizer, Ryan Davis, those and Jordan Allen are all guys that have been on the roster now. I think they could have rotational points. Then Jay-Sean Ross is a kid that was a really highly thought of player out of high school in the Kansas City area, 4-star guy. K-State was trending towards landing him out of high school. And then I think it was maybe a couple of days after he took his visit to K-State during November or October, whenever it was, the Alabama offer rolled in, and that was still Nick Saban was still the coach there. Nobody knew anything was happening. And the second that happened, we're like, he's going to Alabama. Well, he did, and then decided to go into the portal after last year. He's back. So there's a lot of names there. But for the guy that I think needs to break out, because I think every defensive line, especially if you look over the years at K-State, when they have been a really good team and been the Big 12 champs, they have had pass rushers really break through. And I go back close to 4 years ago now at Big 12 Media Day. I was sitting down and Wyatt Thompson, the voice of K-State, came over and we were talking. And he said, who do you think needs to kind of break out for this defense to be good this year? And we both kind of agreed it was Felix Anyudike-Uzomah at the time. Well, he had a really strong 2021, and then 2022, he was the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year, first round pick from the Chiefs. K-State wins the Big 12, goes to the Sugar Bowl, and so that happened. And then you look, Brendan Mott, he broke out last season and was Big 12 Defensive Lineman of the Year. So K-State needs that to happen again. I think Toby Sonmi is the guy that would profile as that. He's a really good athlete. K-State early on, when they were trying to find ways to get him on the field, moved him back and forth between defensive end and linebacker. He was good in his pass rush situations last year. Now he's in a position where he's going to have the option to claim a majority of the snaps on the field. He's just going to have to be a little bit sharper in some of those, but that's probably the guy that needs to lead the team in sacks and be one of the best pass rushers in the Big 12 this coming year.
Do you think this K-State defensive line could be one of the better defensive lines in the Big 12 this year?
I think so. I think they've got just so many guys that are trustworthy there that have made plays even in limited action or as younger players over the last season or two. And you can go back and look at so many different games last year, and all these different guys had key sacks, whether it's against Colorado or KU or whoever it was in these games that were impactful to the season. They had different guys step up, like Travis Bates. He was a Ball State transfer last year. He had some moments and he showed some quickness on the as a defensive end. And Cody Stufflebean's a guy that they kind of had a fight to get to come back last year for depth reasons. He was thinking, I think he was going to graduate in like 3 years from K State and just decide, you know what, I think I'm done. They got him to come back, and then it wasn't even a question that he was going to come back for his season this year. So they have a lot of guys that are like that, and then three young guys, Ryan Davis, Jordan Allen, and Jay Sean Ross are ones that people want. And I kind of Chidi Obi Iser is the same age as all those guys, but he's carved a pretty solid role already. So they are deep, and I think they have a lot of guys where it's not just I hope that this guy's good. I think all these players are good. It's just they're going to need that one guy to step up and be great.
So the linebacking unit is probably the strength of the defense. Would you say so?
Yeah, probably so. It helps that Austin Romaine is there, who was good as a true freshman. Like he saw the field as a true freshman, and maybe that was a little surprising at first and everything, but he proved okay, this guy's solid. And then last year was just pretty much from the get go. Game two was they played at Tulane, and they were kind of struggling getting the offensive footing and everything. And things had finally kind of settled down. They had tied the game up, and it's getting into the middle, late fourth quarter. And Tulane gets the ball back. Darian Mensa's kind of driving down the field, and he goes back to throw. K-State's pass rush gets there, and Austin Romaine gets to Mensa, but instead of just taking him down, he makes the phenomenal play of swiping the ball away, and Jack Fabris picks it up and takes it for a touchdown that ultimately won the game for K-State. And from that point forward, Austin Romaine did not slow down. PFF throws it out all the time that he was one of their highest graded linebackers last year. Some of them, he was the top graded linebacker. He was a phenomenal player, not in just the sense that, oh, this guy's solid. Like K-State's had a number of those guys, and every team does, where you go, oh, he's a really good linebacker, one of the best in the Big 12 or whatever it may be. It's not just that, though. He has the big plays on top of that, where I mentioned the play at Tulane or in the game against Kansas last year. K-State gets stopped on fourth down in KU territory. So KU gets the ball back. K-State needs it to take the lead, to get the ball back, and he forces a big fumble on Jalen Daniels, the KU quarterback, that K-State recovers. Like he's solid, but he also is a true playmaker, and he endless possibilities for what he can do at linebacker. And then outside of that, like Des Purnell has played a lot of football at K-State, so there's experience there. And then I mentioned Gabe Powers earlier, one of the Ohio State transfers. He's probably going to be expected to be that third linebacker in terms of pecking order. And then outside of that, like depth doesn't necessarily get thin, but it gets a little shady where you're looking at some guys that have some talent but have been injured. So are they going to come back to 100%? Are they going to be able to stay healthy this year? So you really need those three guys to stay on the field, and that's linebacker health has been a bit of a problem the last few years for K-State. I mean, Austin Romaine, his freshman year, he was playing with like a giant club on his hand at Texas Tech, and it led to him completely whiffing on an interception in Lubbock. So all these guys have dealt with it, but I think they'll be set at linebacker, and there's enough high-end guys that should be probably the strength of K-State's defense.
And in the secondary, so VJ Payne returns at safety. There's going to be a few transfers in the mix in the back end of this defense. What is the thought of the K-State secondary?
So safety is probably the place to start because that seems like the most sturdy area. VJ Payne is now expected to be the next big DB at K-State. Marquise Siegel and Jacob Parrish both got drafted after last year. Parrish was a corner, Siegel was a safety. VJ's played in a lot of football games now, dating back to his freshman year of 2022. And so you're looking at a guy that you're thinking, okay, we're going to see a little bit more of him. He's been good. I think he needs to make another step, but I think that's just projected based off of what he's done. But he showed some playmaking ability. That's another guy that, like I talked about, Austin Romaine just having a knack for the right place, right time. VJ Payne picked off footballs last year in the end zone at the end of the Tulane game to seal the win. And when Shadur Sanders was driving down the field for Colorado late in that game, he got a big interception there. So he has a knack for the big play. He's turned into a really good player outside of that. And then everywhere else on safety, like this is a pretty deep room there. They added Gunnar Maldonado, an Arizona transfer. He was hurt most of last year, but the year prior was really good. I think that might have been one of K-State's best pickups of the offseason. And then from there, Quay Moss is a D2 transfer that I know Nebraska was one that really wanted him, that they beat him head to head for. And then Jack Fabris, Colby McAllister, and a handful of others are going to be lined up for playing time. So safety, they're in a good spot in terms of their depth. It's just you're hoping that what you're projecting plays out on a grander scale, because that was probably their biggest weak spot last year. They had a safety, Jordan Riley, that they brought in, which just turned out to be kind of a complete bust. And by the end of the year, he wasn't even starting for him anymore.
Yeah, and in the day and age of the transfer portal, you hope that these individual players that you get at each position group pan out, because a lot of the times you're counting on these transfers to be the dudes at each position. So moving on to the special teams department, I believe there's going to be a new place kicker this year. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, yes, that's going to be a big point of discussion for K State. Chris Tennant had an up and down career, but by his final 2 years, he had turned into probably one of the better kickers in college football, very reliable. That it's going to be fascinating to see how the kicker position plays out for K State. They're probably looking at a true freshman and Cub Patton having every chance to win that job coming out of it, because special teams has surprisingly been a struggle for K State the last couple of years, and not just in like failure to return like they once did. It's everywhere. That snapping and holding was terrible last year. It cost them games. And then the place kicking, Chris Tennant steadied it, but the guys right behind him, a little shaky. Punter was not fantastic last year. Simon McClannon's back to probably get that role. He's got to improve, though, become more consistent. So it's going to be special teams, not always the most important thing for people to talk about, but for K State, they're going to have a lot to kind of sort through this offseason in that room.
All right, Mason. So I got a question for you here regarding Kansas State's expectations. So if Kansas State wins the Big 12, it's because blank individual or blank position group hit their ceiling.
I would say K State wins. I mean, there are a couple of routes to go. I think they're that good and that deep, but I think the simplest one to go would be that Avery Johnson just has to graze his ceiling, and this team wins the Big 12. If Avery Johnson plays to the level that is projected of him and expected when he came to K State, and what I think is still in there, this team is going to be really good. Like, I thought that they would probably win the Big 12 last year. And if K State wins the Big 12, it's because Avery Johnson's going to be the player of the year in the conference. Every amount of praise that Sam Levitt has gotten, like Avery Johnson can be that player, and I think then some. But I think you look at what Sam Levitt had last year, he had a not much, like pretty comparable offenses when you look at it. Similar quarterbacks, both relied heavily on their running back. It's just that Levitt has a better receiver than Jace Brown. And Jace Brown's a good receiver, but Jordan Tyson is going to be the best in the Big 12 this coming year. And so I think that's where you look at Avery Johnson and Sam Levitt by the end of the year. I think it's going to come down to those two for offensive player of the year in the league. And if that's the case, both of those teams are probably playing each other in Arlington.
The Big 12 has a lot of great quarterbacks this year. They might have the best quarterback play from top to bottom of any conference in college football this coming fall. So it should be really fun to watch. Well, Mason, really good job previewing Kansas State for this coming season. Please tell our viewers and subscribers where they can find your content.
Yeah, so I handle most of the video and podcast stuff for K State Online. We are the On3 K State affiliate, which We're about to get more joining our site at the start of July with the On3 Rivals merger that's taking place. So if you're mildly interested in K-State or really college sports as a whole, you find the team that you want, subscribe to On3, and you can read our content and see all of our posts. If you want to interact with us, you can sign up for KSO specifically on there and have access to our message boards. And then everything that we do with our podcast and video stuff is free, whether it's on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you want to listen. So we do mostly a show every day during the week. It's been a little bit hectic lately for me, so we haven't actually held to that. But we're getting close to being back in the flow and getting things out daily, talking K-State football and basketball.
Well, Mason, thank you for being on our channel today.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.